Not too long ago, I made a video briefly discussing the plans to build a terminus for the Channel Tunnel rail link at Surrey Docks back in the 1970s. Well, since then, I discovered this. A document entitled Channel Tunnel London Passenger Terminal, a document for consultation, published in 1972. And it turns out that the choice for the terminus wasn't between 2 sites or 3 or even 4, but 11. This document actually gives a lot of context that I was missing before. In 1972, it was looking like there would be a Channel Tunnel, but it wasn't certain. Actually, this version of the proposal would eventually be dropped due to lack of money and British Rail internal politics, but that's outside the scope of this document, what with none of this having happened in 1972 and all. It was believed that there was no way any of the existing London terminus stations could handle the traffic, which is a bit weird because the Channel Tunnel rail link we got has always terminated at one of the existing stations. Meanwhile, in London, there was a lot more space available than there is now. The 50s and 60s had seen much of Britain's rail network reduced in the name of economy. And it wasn't just the railways, the docks in East and South East London were also firmly on their way out. So, the 11 sites considered were Surrey Docks, as we discussed earlier, White City, Victoria, Kensington Olympia, Clapham Junction, Bishopsgate, the London Docks, the Isle of Dogs, New Cross, Battersea, and Bricklayers Arms. Now, there were a number of factors that needed to be taken into consideration. Firstly, could the area support such a terminus? Was there space to build the station along with necessary rail and passenger facilities? Or did such facilities already exist? How close was the location to central London? How were the transport links in terms of road and rail, and could further links be added if needed? Additionally, could it be reached from the south of London, which was where the Channel Tunnel line would obviously be coming from? Was there scope for further development? For instance, would people want to build offices there? And could the site be ready by 1980, which was when they thought the tunnel and rail link would be complete? Several of the proposed sites were already British Rail sites of one sort or another. The last couple of decades had not been great for the rail network. In terms of London, many of the old suburban routes had been run down, creating a sort of vicious circle. Lines were unpleasant and inconvenient to use, so passengers didn't use them. So they received less investment, so they became even more unpleasant and inconvenient. Several had closed down altogether. But what this meant was that there were several routes that were ideally suited to run a bit of extra traffic over. Another consequence of the general dreadfulness of British Rail was the closure of goods facilities. The time was when all but the smallest stations had their own goods yard, and there were plenty of stations that handled nothing but. The rise of lorries had seen more and more goods go by road instead, and now there was a lot of vacant land where shunters had once struggled to fit all their wagons. The sites that weren't British Rail were in the Docklands. By the early 70s, very little traffic was coming into the docks, and several of them had already closed. So now there was a vast amount of unused land and a lot of unemployed people. The Greater London Council were particularly keen on the idea of running the railway into the old docks. So, let's see what they say about each of the sites in detail. Bishopsgate is a former goods station, which in turn was the former passenger terminus of the Eastern Counties Railway. It's actually located in Shoreditch, not too far from Liverpool Street and just outside the boundaries of the City of London. The report dismisses the site as unsuitable for rail operation. There were 2 British Rail routes in the area, but the line into Liverpool Street was already busy, and the North London line branch into Broad Street would give a long, circuitous ride. The report also states that it had insufficient space for terminal facilities, which is fair enough, I suppose. Onward transport links, both rail and road, were considered poor. On the plus side, there were likely to be few objections to the land being reused, and the proximity to the city meant that there were facilities nearby. BR also thought it had potential for office development, which of course has happened in the subsequent decades. The Battersea site would have used the old Great Western Railway goods depot near Battersea Power Station. The hope was that the new Covent Garden Market would provide some growth in the area, but in any case it wasn't too far from central London. There are plenty of railways in the area, But that was kind of the problem. Too many viaducts cutting the site up. And to add insult to injury, none of the stations on those viaducts had the capacity to take any more passengers, nor did the roads over the river into central London proper. Near to Battersea, on the other side of the river, is Victoria Station. In terms of location, it's hard to beat. Victoria is central London. Depending how you define it, you might even class it as the West End. In fact, with its long history of boat trains to the coast, you might even argue that it was already an international station. The difficulty here was that there was no space. The station would have had to have been completely rebuilt. So why choose it in the first place? Well, because the plan was that it was going to be rebuilt anyway, so might as well incorporate the Channel Tunnel while we're at it. Unfortunately, there was no space for carriage sidings either, which were considered necessary. The area around Victoria is also extraordinarily wealthy, and you can bet those people weren't going to be happy about an international terminus there. Just down the line from Victoria was Clapham Junction, one of the busiest stations in Britain. On the plus side, it connected to both the line from East Croydon and the West London line, both potential routes for Channel trains. On the minus side, everything else. To quote the report, British Rail wished to eliminate this site from consideration due to complete lack of available area on which to locate the terminal, all railway lands currently being fully operational. So that's that. How about Olympia? That's also on the West London line. Actually, there were 3 sites around Olympia that could have been chosen. One was at Olympia itself, which would have involved the demolition of the exhibition halls next to the station. Another was just south of Olympia, on the site of a coal yard. And the third was at West Brompton Station, which at that stage was only an underground station. The old railway station had closed and the current overground station hadn't opened. In general, once again, the problems were space and transport capacity. Olympia had the capacity to increase numbers of trains on the District Line shuttle, but not much space. West Brompton is on the Wimbledon branch of the District Line, which was very, very busy. Also nearby was White City, and this was British Rail's favourite site. They already owned most of the necessary land. There were 2 underground lines, the Central and what's now known as the Hammersmith and City. The Westway provided a road link with Marylebone and Paddington. The West London and East Croydon lines would connect. The area was in need of regeneration, so there was plenty of space for offices, hotels, and whatever else. This quickly rose to the top of the list. Bricklayers Arms and New Cross kind of come as one. The idea was that one site could provide carriage sidings for the other, depending which was chosen. Bricklayers Arms had begun life as a terminus station and had subsequently been used as a goods depot, a locomotive depot, and a set of carriage sidings. Both would be approached via the South London line, what's now part of the Overground. To get to Bricklayers Arms, a 4.5-mile tunnel would be dug from New Cross. Bricklayers Arms had decent rail and road connections and plenty of BR-owned land, but it was kind of isolated. It was a hike from central London with no underground line and little capacity for development. There was a real possibility that those road and rail connections would soon become overwhelmed. The station at New Cross might have been at New Cross Station or New Cross Gate Station. These sites suffered from much the same problems as Bricklayers Arms. They did have a tube connection, but it was the East London line, which itself was poorly connected to the rest of the network. In any case, the local authority were already carrying out some redevelopment, and it seems that their plans for a residential area would not be compatible with what BR had in mind. Surrey Docks was also on the East London line. The thinking was that this could also be reached from New Cross Gate via a new surface railway. There could also be a bridge across the Thames to the North London line. Other suggestions are a tunnel connection from Catford and or the West London line. The big plus of this site was that there was nothing but space. They could make the terminus as big as they liked. At the time the document was published, it was kind of isolated, but what would become the Jubilee line was in the planning stages, and everyone was trying to kick-start redevelopment in the Docklands. So this was also one of the favoured sites, although not quite as favoured as White City. The London docks are north of the Thames, basically right next to the city. Otherwise, the pluses and minuses were much the same as for Surrey Docks. It would be reached via tunnel, again from New Cross Gate, And the Fleet Line, the name for the Jubilee Line in its planning stages, was also intended to serve this area, but it didn't have the space that Surrey Docks did, so scope for development was limited. Finally, the Isle of Dogs. Much like Surrey Docks, the advantage was space. It was due to be redeveloped, but the exact nature of this redevelopment was very much in the air. Connections and local facilities were terrible. Actually, a couple of years previously, the island had attempted to secede from the rest of the UK in protest. A terminus being built here depended entirely on what the other plans were for the area, so it was never much of a contender. Well, as we all know, none of these sites were chosen in the end. In the end, and long after this version of the Channel Tunnel rail link had been abandoned, Waterloo Station was picked as the terminus. Then, in 2007, it was replaced by one at St Pancras, as it remains today. As you can tell from my footage, all of these sites have since had at least some level of redevelopment, and only Bishopsgate remains substantially derelict. The West London, North London and South London lines that were key to the 1972 plans have all been revamped into the overground. I should point out that none of these proposals were very detailed, and it's hard to say if any of them would actually have worked had the scheme gone ahead. But imagine if they had. We might have had no Westfield in Shepherd's Bush, no exhibition centre at Kensington Olympia, no Canary Wharf. We'd be looking at a very different version of London and its rail network today. Well, I do hope you enjoyed today's video. If so, please do leave a like and consider subscribing for more. Do you think any of these ideas would have worked? How about some others? Personally, I find myself thinking that if they'd waited a few years, they could have added Broad Street to the list. Or Holborn Viaduct, use the Snow Hill Tunnel to provide trains to the north. But all that's purely speculation. Anyway, I would like as ever to thank my donors on Ko-fi, on Patreon, and here on YouTube for your kind support. You are the new cross to my tunnel, and I'll see you all again very soon. Cheerio.